Okay, great. So I want to call this meeting to order of the Arts Commission Grants and Funding Committee. It's April 13th, 2006 at little tiny bit after 1:00 p.m. And first, I want to say that Metro Arts mission is to drive an equitable and vibrant community through the arts, and pursuant to the provisions of 2.68030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws. Please take notice that decisions of the Arts Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the commission. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. Thank you so much. Vivian, how are you today?
Doing well.
I was wondering if you would be able to do a roll call.
I surely can.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Lefkowitz,
Is here.
Commissioner Jester,
Present.
Commissioner Knight,
Here.
Commissioner Wade, Director Batchelder.
Here.
Metro Art Staff, Jackie Handsome.
Here.
Myself, Vivian Fox, and then from Metro Legal, Kelly Woodward,
Here.
and we are all here.
And then Damien and Chuck here as well. Okay, great. So welcome, everybody. I'm wondering, Vivian, if there is anyone who signed up to give in-person public comment, or if anyone submitted public comment before.
We do not have any in-person public comments or any public comments submitted.
Thank you. Just a reminder that we encourage written or in-person public comment at all Arts Commission's meetings, and there is an online public comment form. I want to move to the approval of the minutes. Thanks to the staff, because I know it was a very quick turnaround for all of this since we just met last Monday. And so thank you for providing all these materials to us. And you should have received the minutes from April 6th, which was last Monday. And we hopefully have time to review. I have reviewed them. And if you review them, I would take a motion at some time to approve them.
I move we approve the minutes from March 6th.
April 6th.
A resounding second.
Okay, April 6th. Okay, and Commissioner Jester, was that a second?
A resounding second. Yes.
Okay, resounding second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay, thank you. The minutes are approved from April 6th. We move right into our discussion action items. And we did go over the general operating and Thrive last week, which I'm glad for. But we're gonna start with a staff report. And so I will now turn it over to whoever is doing the staff report. Is that you? Is that you're doing, Jackie? Do it?
Yes, we'll do it.
Mhm.
On behalf of Josiah Golson's Community Arts Leaders Program of Nashville, they have ongoing activities with this semester's program. On last Wednesday, April 8th, we held a professional development workshop virtually on career development. The virtual check-ins are ongoing and underway, and there is a celebratory closing lunch scheduled for May 8th at 11:30 to 1 at Shelby Bottoms Nature Center. So for all of the commissioners here, you are cordially invited to mark your calendar and join us and let us know. Josiah will send additional.
What's that date again?
May 8th, the Friday?
That's commencement.
Yes, it is commencement. I know. I got invited as well. They will open our grant application.
Okay. Big day.
Big day. So we are also going to do a little talking about grant activities. So as you know, we held for a little over a month, we did 19 different grant check-in meetings. So out of the operating grantees, 76 of 79 have been completed. So the others, we've been in conversation and are in the works of scheduling one-on-ones. 86 of 86 Thrive grantees have completed their check-ins. So we're still doing some follow-up from that, including we'd like to share out some of the information, but we did an initial kind of staff after action about all of that and what our next steps, priorities would be. I will turn it over to Ashley for a few more updates now.
Sure. So you'll see in our priorities there, just, high level updates about FY 26. We are thinking about closeout, and so we shared the closeout forms and got your feedback a few months ago, and so those are finalized and they've been available to grantees who want to complete them early. But as we look at that deadline of July 15th, our goal is to have some support resources available by mid-May so that people who want to complete it early can have some extra guidance on completing by it. So there'll be some planning that we do on the staff side. So that's for closeout, and since we kind of revamped what closeout looks like, we're excited to receive the information. We know that people love, sharing what they've been able to do with support from Metro Arts, and we will look forward to receiving and sharing that information. And so we also have our grants coordinator position that you've heard us reference, and some of you may have helped share that around perhaps as well. We just got our candidate list today, and so we will be preparing to review candidates that applied. I was expecting a pretty large volume of applicants, and that expectations were met. So just the process that we use for that is we do a written round of peers, 5 or 6 questions. We receive written information to help us determine who we want to go for an interview for further conversation. So Jackie and I will be working on that together with an anticipated hire for that person in May, and can't come soon enough. So new hire starting at a very busy time, and so someone who is excited to jump right into something with a lot to do. And then FY 27, we'll get into talking about that as we go back to the guidelines here. And so upcoming events, kind of think of these as save the dates. Jackie already mentioned May 8th. June 15th is a Monday. It's what we are looking at for the FY 26 grantee celebration. So last cycle we did separating Thrive celebration, a separate Thrive celebration and a separate operating celebration. We are going to bring everyone together and do a large one in that window of 5 to 9 p.m. That's on a Monday in June. We know there's a lot going on in June. So that is the date that we picked, and we're going to get a save the date out to grantees specifically. And then there will be a public invitation later at a date later. And then the other thing that you might be interested in, as save the date for July 29 and 30th, that's a Wednesday and Thursday. Those are the dates that we're looking at for our review panels. What is subject to change is if we do not move our guidelines forward either this week at commission or on May the 7th at council. Those are the 2 things that would cause those dates to change. But right now, those are the dates that we are planning to hold our panels. And so some of y'all came and observed last year, and you are, of course, invited. We'll do so. And then the other part of the grant guideline or the staff report is the next page in your packet. It's just a timeline that we bring you every month of some of those high level things, dates for the approval process, application period as we move through June, July, things that overlap with application reviews and panel reviews, and our closeout calls with that. But maybe if you want to just look at that and if there's something specific you want to talk about. And if you want the detailed work plan, Jackie and I have our very detailed work plan with more formal dates or more detailed dates as well.
Looking ahead to council on the calendar, like thinking about the 6th and the 7th, and it looks like Apple's the same day as the council meeting. So you'll let us know if there's any advocacy that we can do or, letters of support, whatever, or ways to support. I mean, I'll plan to be there obviously on the 7th, but, yeah, don't just let us know about,
Yeah, so we'll be assigned to the budget committee and the Apple committee. I should put a little asterisk next to May 6th. I think that the meeting will be on May 6th,
Yeah.
but the 7th is actually a Thursday and council is typically on Tuesdays, but Tuesday, May the 5th is an election.
Mhm.
So everything shifts to
Mhm.
Thursday. Kelly, but do you by chance know when council shifts to a Thursday, are there still committee meetings the day before or is everything stacked into one day?
It really just kind of depends, but typically it would be the day before.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so the dates are a little bit off, of what a typical schedule is, but yeah, we will, once we know that we've met the filing dates, we will move forward, assuming that we are on the agenda for those days. And so will we have another meeting before then? We will not have another meeting before then.
Correct, that's what I was asking, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so we'll put a call out for commissioners to, if you want to attend,
Mhm. The 6th and the 7th.
yeah,
Mhm.
and primarily on the 7th.
Right.
Historically, I haven't got a lot of questions in the budget committee.
Mhm.
Questions usually come in the Apple committee.
That's great. Okay,
And so this whole timeline is based on us opening applications the next day, that May
Yeah.
9th, it's a Friday.
so yeah, and this also assumes approval this week and that we stay on. Mhm. Okay, that's great. Do you want to move to, thank you for that staff report. Do we want to move to looking at the 27 operating guidelines? And there are 2 action items for us today, which are approval of the guidelines for operating and Thrive. Last week, we approved the guidelines for panelists. And so, at Wednesday's commission meeting, we will bring the panelist guidelines, and then whatever, if we take action today, we'll also bring those. So do you want to chat with us about these general operating? Excuse me.
Yeah, so let's start with operating, and maybe a question for you all. We've given you a clean copy, so we took out the highlights and then the track changes. Do you want to do a page by page walkthrough? How do,
Well, another thing is, I know Commissioner Jester, you had to leave last week, and then we received an overview of these. I would be most interested in, excuse me, anything that has changed since that overview, because that was quite satisfactory to me. But then Commissioner Jester, I want to make sure that you have had a chance to review, and so.
Fine with the overview, and then I mean, I've looked over these, so. Hit the highlights and I'll ask you any questions that might have.
Okay. Commissioner Knight, is that good?
Mhm.
Okay, great.
I have the highlighted version from last time and this version.
And I have mine too. As we kind of shared before, with the eligibility, we tried to be really explicit at the onset, about, what kind of constitutes meeting the criteria, what it means to be the kind of organization, do the kind of artistic programs that qualify you for this funding source. We try to also be explicit about who cannot receive grants, because we do, as you all know, and you yourselves get questions about that. So we did a little clarifying from previous years, but have not substantively added. We have part about religious practice and intent elsewhere, so we wanted to capture that here as well, since it is part of the cannot receive. and we clarified the Friends of being primary purpose to support government agencies. Again, in the spirit of we do not provide direct funding to other government agencies or employees. Eligible expenses, I know I've kind of talked about similarly in other spaces. This kind of gets into some of our resource guides. So for some of these things, you know, I actually don't see it. It's gonna come up in Thrive, but you know, if there's anything that's like, folks would have questions on that, we're gonna try to articulate elsewhere, and we'll do a walkthrough of the application where we're asking folks to join for an informational session, but we'll also have that recording for anyone who can't or that wants to refer to it as they're completing an application. We tried to give an idea of kind of where our cycle takes place. You know, for some people, they might be bound to calendar years or other kind of cycles. So just for those who don't know the Metro fiscal cycle, and then how that dictates kind of when they can do their activities and spending and close out the grant. And just setting some expectations we added in about kind of the timely dispersal process. So the earliest activities could be beginning is October 1st, of course, knowing that, you know, we are not capturing all projects that exist in the calendar as of yet, and we are actively moving towards that in our timeline as we can. Would you like to take a turn on page 6, Ashley?
Yes, so page 6, the grant categories, micro through large, are the same. You know, we identified that as something that is a very substantive change, and so that could be a conversation for future years. But what we added here is some clarity in the description under categories. So the enumerated 1, 2, 3 of things that do not count in your revenue, and those are based on questions that came up this year or last year, the year that we're in right now. And then the main clarifying information that we added for award amounts this year is the link to previous year's operating grant amounts so that people can sort of ground their expectation in what recent grant amounts have been and not base it on these very aspirational amounts, as I call them. And as we work on our communication with applicants, you know, we'll talk about that a lot, of course. On page 7, we've shared that we are implementing an optional preliminary deadline. This is 4 weeks after the application opens and 3 weeks prior to the final deadline. So for applicants who submit by that date on that time, staff will spend Monday through Wednesday of the following week reviewing those using the same process that we do at the final review. And we'll give any feedback to the applicant about improvements that are needed or would be beneficial to their application. What's sort of different about this is the formality of it, because all through this current cycle, you know, we had daily meetings that we would have scheduled and like drop-in events that people could get help. So we were always having those conversations, but we believe that by putting it in this more formal structure, people will be more likely to take advantage of it as well.
We can really push for anybody that's a first-time applicant contacting us with questions, or someone who's, you know, unsure about where they fall on eligibility. We can really try to steer those folks to taking advantage.
The dates in the table there, you know, are the dates that we've talked about elsewhere. Like Jackie said, the information sessions, these will be virtual and live information sessions that people can take advantage of, which is really a walkthrough of the guidelines. And then I think Jackie referenced the pre-recorded video as well, you know, a tightly scripted walkthrough of the guidelines that will just be available on the MetroArts website, you know, probably 15 minutes long or so, that will cover the same information that's in the live meetings. Just, of course, it will not be, you know, that Q&A live element there. not too much has really changed in the review process, the funding formula, the approvals. We've added a little extra language just for purpose of clarity and detail throughout there, but nothing that is substantively a matter of policy. Yeah.
What was the reason for adding the language for maintaining good standing? Somebody gets pulled over for DUI or something and they don't report it, like what was?
Well, so this is for organizations. So there have been some things that have come up in Metro at large around, what is the process if, if we open the newspaper, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a big legal issue with.
XYZ organization, yeah.
And so this doesn't necessarily say what would happen, but it says that we need to be notified, right? Because we can't predict those things.
And were mentioned in your publicity.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, it's more organizational than individual. I wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah, and so they would be things that would be handled on case by case.
Yeah. That's-
And there's no real change to what the audit policy says. The checklist is no new information. And that brings us to page 12 and 13, I think an opportunity for us to talk about the applications and the rubric. And again, the rubric is what I would say is probably the biggest change this year. We did not change the meaning or the intent, and in most cases did not change the words of the questions. We sometimes made them more make sense, the questions themselves a little bit more sense. But the rubric, instead of being based on a 1, 2, 3, or 4 scale, is based on a 0 through 10 scale, and that we believe will be to the benefit of people preparing their applications, having more information about what we're looking for, and to the benefit of the panelists as one major thing that is going to, we believe, help address consistency and reliability of scores.
We should also mention just again that in the past, only larger organizations, besides we're answering 6 and 7, in thinking about what that looked like, it was already written in such a way that if you don't have planning, what are you doing to know that you're designing your programs and activities for the future? Everyone who is applying for funds has had to make those choices and have those conversations and plans in place. So we wanted to give them the chance to speak to that as well. So all orgs will answer all 7 this year.
And so maybe at this point, it makes sense to look at this outline. So Jackie is taking the lead on developing the resource guide that we've referenced. And I think what's going to be most helpful to, again, applicants and panelists is a breakdown of question by question. Here's what we mean by community. Here's what we mean by accessibility, that word. You can consider things like X, Y, Z in your response. Is there anything you want to say about what you put in the?
Yeah, so we just, we'll have obviously separate resource guides for each type of grant, but for operating, starting out with just, again, a timeline all in one place with the kind of key dates, envisioning folks maybe having an application pulled up, having this resource guide, potentially having the info video, things like that, so that they could be filling out their application with it there. And just understanding kind of the buckets in which, like Ashley talked about, keeping the spirit of the questions from before while we're in this 3rd year of the cycle, but trying to be explicit about what we're asking for. So last year, there were questions from folks applying, folks like myself, who last year was a panelist, like, what do we mean by at risk? So we tried to think about what was the spirit of what was being asked, and then we reworded that question, but then we tried to contemplate, we have this developing guide on some of those pieces. And I know last time Commissioner Knight, you asked about producibles, and so things like that, of what do we mean even by giving folks a chance to talk about their work more explicitly and giving them ways to do that and breaking down like how they can upload those sections. We also then, it can be a one-stop shop of things that will appear, of course, elsewhere, like on the website, like that video we described. Staff support, so as Ashley mentioned, I think from what I've seen, there were over 100 sessions offered last year. Similarly, we will have some in-person opportunities, but we'll also have a link to our Microsoft bookings and just kind of explain some of the limits on like, how far in advance one would need to book that, things like that. And then lastly, just having the background check policy informed, because there has to be an attestation to that. And so having them have access to it here as well. It's very similar for Thrive. I'll just say that with that one, it also has kind of the fiscal sponsorship, greater explanations, forms, etc. So. Okay.
Is there a reason behind Thrive being able to answer their questions via video and that option not available to operating? I'm assuming it's because of bandwidth and what they might be able to do individually versus an organization. Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yeah, I think answer it. So for Thrive, the video or audio response is limited to the questions that are about like describing your project.
Gotcha.
And when I inherited these guidelines, that was really just one question on Thrive as well, because Thrive used to just be 3 questions. What are you gonna do? What is your project? What is your budget? What is your timeline? So what is your project was the only one that could be answered via video or audio.
Gotcha.
The other 2 were always written. And so we've kept that as the video and audio, but because we've expanded the ways that we ask that question, which makes it a better application as well, having the additional questions. We kept the option for those. That's how it got there. Yeah, on operating, it just has never been an audio or video option. I think the reasoning is because, it was a longer application. And so, I think part of,
And it's not project-based in the same way Thrive is too.
We do still have an optional part now, to kind of
Right.
speak to that
Yeah,
question one where
picture
folks
video.
were like, hey, I wish I could be in the room pitching my org.
Right.
We still do community panels. And so, folks are not coming in the way maybe they did in cycles in other points in the timeline, right? And so there is an optional 2-minute video, but it's still, trying to make it where you're not being evaluated on whether or not you do it, but if that was something where you're like, if they could hear my voice and hear my story in a short form, if I could be the one to intro instead of, whoever the lead panelist is. So we were trying to get the spirit of that and also be really mindful of where that might create more time on, say, like the panelists and the staff side reviewing.
Okay.
yeah, and so I've gone through 2 cycles. In my first cycle, I don't remember there being any videos or audio recordings. In the most recent cycle, I believe there were 3 or 4 audio or video recordings. So it's not been utilized very frequently. And
I think in general too, we have some accessibility options on the front page of the guidelines. So if folks did want, I know for myself, I've been a part of things in the past where we have had more video options. I think it's important to think about different ways people respond and what that, might give people a chance to do or showcase, at the volume that we have right now too. I'm not sure how we would do that for everything, but if people want, need, or would benefit from that option, it's still available.
And from my limited experience with the 4 or so videos that were submitted, I think that it is harder to answer the, a question like, what is the impact of your organization's work versus a question of like, tell us exactly what you are going to do. Like, that's.
Yeah, and the hope too is in a pre-application period, if somebody, as someone that has been an educator, like thinking about ways you might translate I sometimes talk through responses and then transcribe and edit them, right? And so there could be an element too, if folks are figuring this out in a different way and want to use different forms, like having a pre-application period helps with that too.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit of feedback from people who have reached out, after seeing these. They were posted online at the same time that we sent them to you all, which, so they've been available to the public for a week and a half at this point. Nothing but positive feedback. I don't want to make it sound like we've heard from 100 people because we haven't, right? But the handful of people who have reached out, we're supportive of the changes to the rubric, just generally supportive of like having the information in advance,
And the
people-
clarity of it.
Yeah.
I think this is related to this, but I don't know how directly. So if this is an inappropriate question for this moment, let me know. I know in the past there have been concerns about the submittable platform itself. Were those specifically in the challenging time of reopening applications in that 1 year? I mean, have we had any particular issues since then that we need to be aware of?
So I don't think that there's any concerns about it that make me hesitant about using it.
Yeah.
The year of the delay, yeah, I mean, it caused lots of problems because
They were
it had
sitting
to
there for
be
so long.
reopened and everything had to be changed. What I would say is we know the limitations of submittable, so here's one limitation is like you cannot send communications to 2 people at the same time through submittable. So say you and I are in an organization together and we both want to be communicated with, submittable does not allow for that. That's a frustrating limitation, especially when we think about like Thrive artists who have fiscal sponsors. So we know where we have to like sort of build infrastructure outside of it, but submittable is fine.
It's working well for what you need with this.
Yeah.
Great. I don't know if you're ready for this, but I move that we approve these and send them forward to the full
So approve the
commission.
operating.
Approved operating grants and move them forward to the full commission.
Second.
Any discussion?
Is there any more discussion? Is there any more information? Commissioner Jester, does that feel like that gets it?
Yes.
So we were able to hear. Okay, and, can I ask, I mean, Commissioner Wade was here, so was able to hear, no, she's not here to vote, but, she obviously would have felt like she could send comments or things, and, right? So,
And then she did ask some preliminary.
yeah,
And we, I think, captured some of that also in the meeting from the next.
yeah, perfect.
And we did, just to speak to that, Commissioner Wade did request, and we did before we finalized the panelists, that rubric did go to a 10-point scale.
Great, great, okay.
Did what?
We did
10.
change the panelist rubric to a 10-point scale.
10-point scale, yeah.
I also see the resource guide table of contents.
Yes.
Which,
I think was another thing. she
yeah,
was missing.
which was great. Okay, so if there's no more discussion, all in favor of adopting the operating grant guidelines to send to commission Wednesday? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Perfecto. Thank you so much. These are approved to go on to commission on Wednesday. Shall we thrive now?
Let's, actually, would you like me to start? Would you like to start? Okay, so similarly, when we talked about the overview and the operating grant guidelines in Thrive, just trying to be explicit out of the gate about what the intent of Thrive Project grants is, and very clearly aligning that both with, it has to be towards how we define art, which can be expansive, but you do need to be art focused in what you propose. And then describing successful projects as those aligned with Metro's mission, since we do know that, we need to be focused in the funds that we do have. Looking at the eligibility, we tried to articulate something that was already happening within applicants, which is that folks might be applying as individual artists, as a collective, or as a nonprofit, and thinking about kind of articulating the criteria a little differently depending on what kind of category you might fall to. So this will translate directly onto the submittable application of where things will branch depending on what you select. And we did add, since we spoke last, the artist collectives, like if you're a nonprofit or an individual artist, you must either be based in or conduct the majority of your programming in Nashville and Davidson. So just keeping that same spirit in that type of applicant. We similarly have kind of this is some of that language around the standings. Again, we thank you legal for your help on getting that aligned. And then just again, the same, who cannot apply. And so that's something, again, we welcome folks and we get these kinds of questions on, would I be eligible for this? And we can help speak to that, or if we know of other things, point them in those directions. But of course, we do have limitations being government funds. And then we do talk about just kind of, and we get questions a lot about, should I be applying for this or that? And we have been letting folks know that, you would not apply as an organization for both a Thrive and an operating support grant. So we've been clarifying that. We tried to speak to that here as well. With fiscal sponsorship, you want to dive into that a bit, Ashley?
Sure, there's nothing substantively different or new this year. The format is a little different. We put the bullet point requirements there. It looked different last year. We had it in paragraph form. But it's generally the same process. We are working on some support materials. We've talked about like scenarios of how some fiscal sponsor arrangements may look, with the caveat that it may look different for every relationship, but we can give some examples, like some generic examples. That'll be in the resource guide, so you see that in there.
Can we provide them with sort of a generic agreement template?
Yep, so there's two templates. One needs to be returned to us with all the information requested. That's just basically the contact person confirming, attesting that they are agreeing to serve in that role. We'll ask for that on the organization's letterhead, and that gets submitted with the application, and that becomes an exhibit to the contract as well. So that's what ties the project work through the applicant to the fiscal sponsor to the contract. So that's kind of the chain of connection there. So that's called our letter of fiscal sponsorship. We have what's called the letter of agreement. That is a suggestion. So anything on a template can be changed. That's things like, are you going to provide all of the funding upfront to the artist? Is there going to be some different payment schedule? you know, what agreements do the artist and the fiscal sponsor want to have about reporting deadlines? Does the fiscal sponsor want to review reports before they're submitted to Metro Arts? So it's kind of like a, you know, a list of things that it is highly suggested is worked out on the front end. But those decisions are all conversations and decisions among those two parties. So that document does not become part of the contract because we cannot enforce that. But those are the sort of two standard things. And so then the additional resource will just be, you know, other things that have come up, things that have come up in the check-in questions, tips and things like that. And we are keeping the same process of fiscal sponsors will receive $750 to support administrative supports that is at the discretion of the organization to use as appropriate for them. And that's added on top of the grant amount. So if the grant is $10,000, the contract is for $10,750.
And then also there would be those kind of like scenarios or like models of engagement, you know, in that resource guide too, that would be helpful for the fiscal sponsors.
Yeah, those are the generic ones, actually.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
and of course, we don't dictate any of this, but we, you know, this is how we have to operate to share the funds. So we want to make sure we provide resources, but not dictates. The only dictate is doing that letter of fiscal sponsorship if we need that.
Yeah, this is more like guidelines for their conversation.
Yes.
With their.
And then the last one would just be like, you may see yourself here.
Yeah,
Then you might want to think about this, but
yeah.
that's.
I think that would be really helpful, and I can see, yeah, like, just like a range, like you said, of different levels. It might look like this, it might look like this, it might look like this, and all of that can give them, be really helpful, I think, in having a conversation.
That's the fiscal sponsor section. Next on page 6 gets into proposal requirements. So the first sections were about the applicant requirements. These are proposal requirements. What we took out from what we gave you last week was the point around core programming, the reference to Thrive projects needing to be independent of core programming of organizations that receive operating funds. We talked about the intent of that and what the word should say, and we decided to take it out.
Yeah.
What we don't want is say that, you know, you have Jester's organization, I am Thrive, a Thrive project, and my application says, I am going to run, you know, I'm trying to think of like an alliterative program name that rhymes with your name, but I can't think of one, you know. If my application says, my Thrive project is to run a program at your organization, you know, that is what we are, you know, want to.
We're not trying to discourage partnerships and ecosystem work that we celebrate the existence of and want to, you know, have not be prohibited by something. And we were already getting questions, to Ashley's point, about folks looking at the guidelines and contacting us with really great feedback and questions. And that was one that already had received a few questions. People just trying to do their due diligence and make sure they're in, you know, within the guidelines. So I think, you know, the spirit of that, we do want to make sure that we clearly articulate what these grants are and are not, while not keeping people out that.
But we don't want just a project supporting the operations of an organization.
Yeah.
That's, so where we do address that is in page 7. Grant funds cannot be used for the operating expenses of an organization.
Yeah.
So we feel that that is what we can lean on if there are questions that come up during review.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and hopefully those things will come up in the preliminary application review so that we can talk through anything. So
that's great.
that's the solution that we came up for, is that it's about your expenses.
Yeah.
I completely understand the reasoning behind removing that. If we're gonna remove it now, I would just ask that we put the question back into our parking lot, because my concern is double dipping from a fiscal sponsor organization who is also getting funding from an individual who's gonna be part of their season. And that, to me, limits the potential to reach a broader group of people. So the question is, how do we phrase that? And it might be too big a question to figure out at the moment, but I don't want us to just ignore that. I worry that that's happening with a couple of organizations.
To Commissioner Knight's point, isn't that why we put that in there to begin with, to make sure that didn't happen?
Yes, that was it.
So the hard thing to do is to name it in a way that doesn't discourage partnerships that we know a lot of this work rely on, right? Or I don't know that that's the right, rely is maybe not the right word.
We
Okay.
want to encourage those partnerships, but also, this discourage or try to not allow, like the things you're talking about, which is, it's not always clear. So like I gave the example last time about, a play, that someone was doing. And, maybe it was through the fiscal sponsorship of the theater company. And it's not on the season, like it's not for this season, right? It's just a development piece,
Yeah.
right? But maybe one day it might be, but it's a long time from that, right? But that's kind of something we would want to encourage, I think, is like those kinds of partnerships, but it's not something that this year is like benefiting the organization. As opposed to what you said, which is like doing something that is part of a season this year, right?
Right.
And I think one way that we've thought about it is like, the project, we want assurance that the project is only happening because of the Thrive League.
Yeah.
Right? That's, I think, one way of thinking about, is this an independent project? Or would it be happening through the organization if this Thrive Lead was not, proposing an idea, obtaining funding for it? If it would be happening in the organization without any of that, then I think that is programming of the organization,
Yeah.
right? But
That's a good way to think of it.
And we also have the part we, I think, talked about last time too, on page 5, it talks about paid full-time executive level staff of organizations. So if you're falling in that category, and we try to be really explicit about what that looked like, arguably your full focus for the purpose of like, if you're within that operating support recipient category, it does feel like that might be something that gets to what you were talking about in the parking lot with like double dipping. We're trying to address that, like, these are separate pools of money, and we know that there has been some murkiness in the past.
Mhm. It's a hard thing to,
Well, overall, I think also you guys know that has been potentially an issue in the past, and you're watching out for it, and satisfied by that too. And if you feel like taking that out will still allow you to be able to police that effectively, then I think that's fine.
Well, I think it's a balance between, again, like, we have to have sort of lanes we're in because we only have so much money. And it creates situations sometimes when you're not clear that, folks earnestly trying to follow the guidelines, maybe don't see themselves in this, but could otherwise be represented. But, I see us being in the role of being responsible with the funds, but we're, using a community process to distribute those
Yeah.
and definitely don't want to be in the business of like being so narrow in what we tell people that, it can't cover a wide variety of options,
Sure.
right? A wide within limits,
Yeah.
but still being expansive in our thinking, which is hard to write for.
it's hard, even the thing, I'm sorry, Julie.
I was gonna say, part of it is that we don't know, like, I don't know if business model is the right phrase, but like the business model of how everything that like could come through, like the interactions that do exist. Right? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, the language, when you know, your example about, a project that exists independently and stuff like that. Once you said that, I reread the thing, I'm looking at the guidelines from the last week where that sentence is still in. Like the proposed project must be independent of core programming. It's almost like be an independent project, you know, whatever,
Of any existing.
of any existing kind of, you know, whatever, like a standalone kind of whatever. But the way it was worded there was a little bit confusing in terms of how it, so I think just emphasizing the independence, freestandingness of the project.
Yeah.
Is what we're trying to get at.
So imagine that if any one of us saw something that we thought might be problematic, we could just bring it on an individual level of staff and we address it that way.
And again, the pre-application in the hopes that also as people are trying to apply and want to know, you know, how to put their best application forward. I mean, it's not just this year, the spirit of that and the work of that has been happening. So giving people opportunities to get that clarity and represent it as best they can, and also understand if it's not, one of the reasons, again, we made the decision to put out the draft is we're getting folks asking us things and clarifying where they fit in this, and so that's a proactive step.
Yep.
Do you feel like this addresses, like if we do move it back, or are there any, I don't know. How are you feeling?
I think removing the language is smart,
Mhm.
but I still feel it's something we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Cause there were a few in the last round that, I didn't have any particular, nothing that I could voice at the moment, but that made me go. And what, Commissioner Jester is saying in terms of if we have that concern, bringing it to staff attention.
Yeah.
Is useful.
And just looking, like learning as we go too, and yeah, okay. All right, so I think I'm good with that. Mhm. And can you make a note, to just keep that
Oh,
on?
yeah, we've got it. We have not, to Commissioner Knight's point, it has not fallen off with
Yeah.
the parking lot. It persists.
Mhm.
Where did we leave off? And I can jump in, Ashley, for an expenses, all right?
And,
Yeah, requirements,
Okay.
differences.
All right, so. What page were we? We are on page 6, in proposal requirements, so. Similar to operating, and we'll have those forms in the resource guide for the background attestation with working with minors. You know, again, just information on making sure you do your due diligence in your proposal for the things it would take to complete a project, be it permit, permission, et cetera. Things like that, just that, you know, on your end, kind of due diligence. Ineligible similarly to operating, we tried to articulate that. One thing we talked about was projects with a primary purpose of workforce and career, and I think, I'll explain this again, because I think it was after you left. We're thinking there of like, you can have, if you're doing arts that still is also around that, maybe it's because you're working with young people, or, you know, we have a Thrive project this year, I'm thinking of where someone is helping other women practice and apply and go out and try DJing and get access to that. Arguably that could be career, but the primary purpose is still learning how to do an art form and create it and practice it together.
Yeah.
So distinguishing that out so that it's not just or mainly, the main thing needs to be art with a sprinkling of workforce or career, not the other way around. And then just again, thinking about things that would take funds and or further permissions that are public property. Outdoor murals is under that same category because the maintenance, the permissions, the way that becomes, you know, needs to be publicly vetted as an image is not something that this is within the Thrive bounds. Getting into expenses, and I'll name contingency funds. So we did articulate not to exceed 500 this year. And and we know, and we always get questions about, well, I proposed such and such in my budget, something has shifted. And we'll say again, you know, the folks, keep us, if you have any questions, of course, ask, but like you'll have in your closeout and then your midpoint check-in the opportunity to kind of address some of those shifts, but we'll define contingency in the resource guide as well, of what people might consider and why it's not over 500. I don't think we have added anything new other than, again, adding the activities with religious study, intent, or practice, because that's from elsewhere within metro policies. Similar to operating, we gave that time frame just to kind of give people a sense of what to expect if we stay on this one, knowing it can change. Submittable, same, just kind of giving folks the ways to access that, and if they have questions that are more around submittable, how to get those answered. And I know we do walk people through things as needed. We gave the deadline calendar, again, like with operating, we have a preliminary, and so we're looking at that optional deadline being June 5th. The info sessions similarly, and we give, we've already blocked off some times on May 18th for a virtual one. 12 to 1 for Thrive, and then Thursday, May 21st, 6 to 7 in person here at Metro Southeast. And I know in the past we've done other clinics and we plan to do that again, kind of geographically spread out. Yeah, so preliminary review. This is the time, and I'll say this for anybody listening. You know, even before you start an application, if you review the guidelines and are not sure if something applies to you, we encourage you to email arts.grants@nashville.gov. We would rather save you any trouble if there's something where it's, you know, you could save time because you wouldn't meet the guidelines.
That note on page 9 of applicants who are unable to attend a live information session can access a pre-recorded video. Is that video up before these information sessions, or is that a recording of those information sessions?
Yeah, we actually talked about what that wording is, but since this won't be officially out until that happens, like it'll be covered, right? You're
Okay.
looking at it in advance of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Video becomes available on May 8th when the application's
That is a
open.
much more clear way to say that.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's that tight 15-minute
Yeah.
walkthrough of the guidelines.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then I know there's a lot of videos that will be happening, and so I too have to break those down in my brain quite frequently. Yes, so I think review process, like in last year's cycle, a tech review where you could have a very short period of time to correct is really administrative or clerical. It is not substantive changes to the application, just for fairness of the volume of applications and for everyone involved.
Particularly on the operating side, that would have saved a couple of people from not being experienced this last cycle, I think, so.
If they had, yeah, and so having a pre-review,
I know that's not,
Yeah.
doesn't apply to Thrive, but this last cycle, I had a couple of times with operating, so.
Yeah. yeah, for sure.
That's a good add.
So we're hoping that, you know, any and all that can will submit before the preliminary deadline. It
Yeah.
helps. Yeah. And then, you know, the scoring and funding, like Ashley talked about, I mean, it is different for Thrive in terms of the formula, but we did also put this on a 10-point scale to kind of create greater nuance, especially knowing that Thrive has been increasingly competitive. And so scoring those, ranking them from highest to lowest, and then distributing in rank order, starting with that highest scoring application and then down to where all funds are dispersed. And if we have a tie like we did last year, then that goes not to us, but folks that were not in the process of doing this, including beyond us within the grants team and other staff involved, would then be the tiebreakers to look at those applications by themselves and distribute that remaining fund from the tie. Yeah. So yeah, we keep records and we do have folks that ask us for feedback. And I think we discussed this last week too with the panelists, but we will be instructing everyone who is a panelist to complete their commentary, and we'll have some discussion of what it looks like to give kind of substantive feedback that's useful for folks that apply. And then, of course, you know, the funding process going through to approval. How we'll send out the awards, letting people know that comes from submittable. And then that'll also go out in a press release. The grant disbursement, we linked to how to do business with Metro, with iSupplier. We do anticipate with the Oracle change that just like we've had at the beginning of this year, there will be some folks who will think that they are within the system, but maybe aren't, given that we have all had to change over. So that'll be its own kind of, as Ashley said, with other things, communication that we'll do and try to just make sure that everybody gets on the same page. I mean, when you're running an org and you're filling out all kinds of things, you know, you think you've done it and you probably have, but it may have changed. Grant check-in meetings, I'm on top of page 11. And so like we just finished completing, we will do those again at the midpoint. And we'll share kind of that anticipated timeline with the award announcements. The final closeout, as ever, July 15th. Well, we have our partner tools section for using the logo. All that's the same. Same verbiage as in operating on the good standing. Took out that sentence on that it's important and instead went straight to like why you need to stay in good standing to ensure that, you know, we're being responsible with the funds and so are you. Page 12, same, none of this really changed in terms of like the auditing and the application checklist. We did break that down. We are, like all of Metro, there's new information about making your documents accessibility compliant. And so trying to have more broken down lists where we can. And then we are to the questions, and you'll see that first one really gets into some of what you were talking about, Commissioner Knight, with like the options for recording. So it is a little bit longer in this 1 minute, that optional question in operating. And I'll just give a minute in case folks have any more specific questions about, like before, we tried to stay within the spirit of the previous questions, and there is a question 6 that panelists score. It's kind of an overall broad view, but it's not something that folks complete. And that one is aligned very specifically with, is it within the bounds of the Thrive criteria? And that's, of course, the first thing we put in the guidelines so everybody can check and make sure that's true, and it's in the rubric as well.
Anything you want to observe about the table of contents for the Thrive Project grants? That's any different than?
I kind of just touched on, the only addition that is a separate category is that it'll have all the fiscal sponsorship.
Yeah.
The letters Ashley was mentioning, as well as the scenarios, which are not explicit, but kind of broad sweeping strokes that might be useful to contemplate if we fall in. Great.
I move we send these Thrive Project grants for the FY 27 grant cycle to full commission on Wednesday.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion about these Thrive grants? Perfecto, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay. Wonderful. Please go forward. And then,
Can I add a little bit about, I should have mentioned it earlier, it's not about these. I was just reminding myself of the process of going to council, since we're not going to have another meeting before then.
yeah,
So what I want you all to know is that the council does not receive these whole documents in their fullness. The title of these say grant criteria and guidelines. The reason that we send the criteria to the council is that it is required by ordinance, AKA the law. But what the ordinance says, it's the law. So the code requires, quote, criteria for awarding of such funds shall be established by this body, the commission, and approved by resolution of the Metropolitan Council each year before funds are awarded. And so this will be our third year doing that. And just so that for your memory, for your reminder, the first year was the FY25 cycle. And we sent the whole thing. We said, here you go. And we were told, why are you giving us all of this information that is not for our business to approve via resolution? So the second year, we were told that it was overpapered. You overpapered the legislation, right? You included a lot of information. So we have since received a lowercase o opinion that we're really only giving council the criteria, which are generally understood to be the specific requirements of eligibility for a grant, such as what is considered an arts organization under the grant. And so as we are preparing that, so full commission will get all of this, right? But what we will give to Metro Legal the next day on Thursday of this week is something that will really just be 2 or 3 pages long. So it's really just
Just page 4.
the criteria. The Thrive one will be a little bit longer because it has project criteria as well as applicant criteria. And that's all that the council received. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands what is our duty to approve and what is the council's duty to approve. And that the council has a much slimmer piece.
In terms of the fiscal sponsorship section, does that fall under criteria?
We did give it to them last year
Under
because it is
criteria.
a requirement in order to receive the award.
Okay, good. All right, great. No, I think that's very helpful. And yeah, that's cool. And essentially, as you said, Commissioner Knight, it's like that page 4, or those sections.
Part of labeled criteria.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Like so they organized it.
Criteria. Okay, that's very helpful. Do you think that it's helpful to share that with, I think it might be helpful to share that with the commission, just in terms of we're approving both of these and then what we send out, just as an education point and what goes on from there.
We can put a couple simple slides together.
Yeah.
Since those meetings are.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I'd forgotten about that. And yeah, they didn't want to read our beautifully assembled things.
But they still can, because they're up on the website. But it's not what they are. They don't, yeah.
I didn't ask a question before, but I want to ask it about, do you mind about the operating? Do you remember when we were talking about the size of the categories and last year? When we get to the allocations phase, that's when we made that little adjustment, right? About like, if you fall between this and that, like kind of the outlier to address that. And so that's a conversation we have later potentially, right?
Yeah, and so that will be, when we are, applying the formulas. And so, what that speaks to is ensuring that each has a minimum and a maximum, because that's, if your scale is here, your aspirational award is here, right?
Yeah.
You'll be scaled down to what is available in the budget, but
Yeah.
when you don't have a floor, we added a floor.
Yeah.
I'm not explaining that well, but is it?
No, but it was just like, bottom line, it was just an adjustment that we could make to make it more to kind of correct it or make it more as beneficial as possible.
And the
right?
sides category transition too, right? So like
Right.
if you are
Mhm.
kind of on that cliff of a category, you can have that contemplated in the old size. It'll just be that.
Yeah, great, okay.
And so in our work plan, what we've got projected out is for staff, we'll send the commission, everybody on the commission, on August the 6th, I believe that's a Thursday, the funding recommendations. Grants committee will meet on the 10th, so that's Thursday to Monday. And then commission does not meet until August 19th, so we're projecting to have that information to commission on the 6th, and then that's a 13-day period.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's an extra week in there of cushion if we end up needing an extra week anywhere, where we could, you know, do what we did
Yeah.
now.
But just once we look at the applications, that'll be, yeah.
And that's something to think about too for going forward, like as we look ahead and think about some of the parking lot items ongoing, we know this is a big one, and we
Yeah.
know this is a big one that we want to discuss in community and invite people into in a variety of ways, and not do it in, you know, in a cycle we're already still within the bounds of a 3-year.
Right.
version.
Right.
But it's definitely a big and known area to give closer attention.
Okay, great. So on Thursday, well, these will be sent to they already have been, but they'll be sent again to commissioners.
Yeah, they'll get it today.
And to
Nothing
say we
highlighted.
approved it.
Yeah.
And then we will be prepared to discuss. Are there any other materials that you anticipate providing them? I mean, we have so much, you know, but like, I don't know.
So it'll be the panelist guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
the operating guidelines, and the Thrive guidelines.
Yeah.
You know, open to suggestions from you all about the best way to present that. It could be, you know, Jackie standing at the visitor podium and doing a presentation of information. If that's slides, if that's just walking.
I'm wondering too, if we just really want to focus on things that have changed, you know,
Like we
to,
did with y'all with like the highlights.
Correct.
Yeah.
just to be, you know, just things that have changed substantively.
It might be worth having, you know, if we're just giving them the non-highlighted copy, it might be nice to have the highlighted copy up there and use that to guide the conversation and the overview of it all.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to print both of these things. But if we see that up there, it'll be easier for them to visually and orally see all the changes that have been made.
Mhm.
I also think it would be worth doing, including the table of contents that you have here for what more people will get, just so they're up there.
The resource guide.
The resource guide.
Yeah, and and we can talk about this because we're not. This is independent of the guidelines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I just want people to know that that information will be there,
Mhm. Yeah,
so that if they feel like something's missing, it's not, it's over here.
so just making a distinction between like, they're not approving that,
Right.
they're approving this is background information, you know, or supplemental. Yeah.
But I do think it would be. Do you think it would be useful to have someone stand up and go through it with all the major changes? I think it just helps people focus on the specific things as opposed to thinking we're just sitting around having a conversation. We're, yeah, that makes sense.
I also do think that, both for all of us, we all get a lot of information all the time, but what you all did before, I think when you presented to us last week, but thinking about what drove overall the changes. So, I mean, thinking about the community engagement that has taken place, thinking about, the comments of the people wanting us to stay on schedule so that we can pay the artists, kind of on time. Thinking about commitment to equity, making things more equitable, more clear, thinking about the feedback and the experience, like, for example, with the questions.
Right,
For the grant, or then the
we've expanded,
rubric,
we've expanded these questions,
Yeah.
we've expanded the size of the rubric for more specificity,
Yeah.
those things.
So just the things that kind of even beginning with that, I think would be really helpful for framing these changes about how we got to these things.
There
Yeah.
are a lot of changes,
Uh-huh.
but strong changes. They may be fine tunings, and so some people may not quite see the significance of them, but they
Yeah.
are significant.
Yeah, because I think that allows us, to talk about the, table contents, like, in that upfront.
Yeah.
And then move on to, and how, yeah.
I also think, that, the check-ins that you've done are not, even though those are about the previous year, I'm sure that you've had, that those kinds of things also have guided some of these changes. and
We,
things like
we
that.
specifically asked.
Yeah.
to and wanted people to follow up with other pieces if they had it, and some did.
Yeah,
Which is
So-
a nice sort of community engagement as far as that goes, at least trying to get the feedback you can.
Well, I'm trying to make, even as we made some tweaks to the application questions, thinking of them in the spirit of what we were asking in check-ins, because why we ask it there is like why we're asking it,
well, and even like thinking about, a slide or something that talks about, well, like the date that you posted these. They've been posted for this long, you've received comments, you've had for FY 26, which seems just amazing, right? Like 76 of 79, 86 of 86, like that's good. And again, that was on the previous years, so I guess just providing some data points to hit home the fact that it was really had so much high touch kind of conversations with people. So that would be my only kind of advice in terms of framing kind of data about the engagement and then what drove it. And that would just help frame, I think, for the commission where we are, and then move into, I agree with Commissioner Knight. I like the idea of having the highlighted version up there and this copy here. And then also the distinction between, as a teaching point, the criteria and guidelines, like what will go on to council.
And if it helps, Vivian, you do not need to make this copy for me again for Wednesday. Save a couple of trees.
Okay.
I will have it
Same,
with me.
me too.
So,
We'll bring ours.
Okay.
So don't break ours. I also don't know, but, just another teaching point or whatever, if we find ourselves getting into conversations about allocations or things like that, that's when that happens, reminding people, we'll see that, but.
Does it feel helpful to provide this kind of a timeline? I mean, there's a couple things on this timeline we could take out, like we don't need the extreme level of detail about council filing deadlines for simplicity, but just to see.
I think it's fine as it is because I think people need to see deadlines.
also changing it just gives you one more thing to do, so it's fun.
Yeah, plus it is part of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if we miss a deadline.
That's still the shorter version.
Right.
This
Well,
is still a shorter version.
And what we want to say is that this timeline is, that we are both responsive about changes, but then also the timeline. I mean, the timeline is about getting people paid before, Christmas, the holidays. So and that's huge for people. So so I agree, like the timeline as is, I think it's great. It'd be great. And we can let the commission know as well that we've met as a committee twice and kind of have really gone through this, incorporated, like the Commissioner Wade was a part of those substantive discussions the first time and heard all of the guidelines as well.
We made some great change that was suggested by this group, including Commissioner Waits. And, luckily, like, I welcome her feedback and I do know she knows that.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, I'm great with it. If there's anything you can think of that we can do to support, but I feel like that framing would be very helpful.
You're breaking open meetings.
No, we weren't deliberating.
I'm not. Is there any other,
Don't make your shirt.
beeswax?
We're making various edits for over here.
Oh, also maybe, providing a slide at the end, assuming we do approve about, encouraging commission members to participate and ways to do so, like show up that day, send emails, whatever.
Also not opposed to just calling the question if we need to.
Come on.
On that.
One thing that we were going to talk about in executive committee meeting last week, but we weren't able to have it, was, the pros and cons of doing more formal committee reports and more formal adherence to Robert's set of rules. So, we have been in a practice for a couple of years, it was before me, of having discussion when there is no motion on the table.
Yeah.
Right, and so if a committee has recommended 3 things, the committee report ends with, all right, I'm making a motion to approve whatever, and then there's discussion, right?
And we have not been following that at all.
And we haven't, and the body's always acknowledged that we don't do that, but I think there's benefits to doing that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's just a learning point. And I will say, I think that our discussions are so productive, like really, like they're compared to, when we started and just in terms of knowing, I feel like we're doing the work in here and in commission and having good discussions. So that means that kind of adhering more to, they present, we do a motion second, and then we discuss. And that would just add more clarity to the process. Even thinking about last time, like if there'd been we should voted it down, and vote to send back, or I could have withdrawn, I guess, the motion too. But, so I'm good with that in terms of,
But technically Wednesday, this is the motion.
this is the
Yeah.
motion. Yeah.
And we'll create our slides that way, because, the slides follow the loose structure typically where it's let's discuss for 30 minutes, and now, is there any kind of emotion that someone?
Yeah, I like the idea of having the motion, right, at the end of the presentation, and then moving on from there. And then I think the question is, do we just, like if there's as we go along, are people holding on to their questions? As you all present, or, maybe we could ask clarifying questions, while you present, but try and hold discussion pieces to later, things like that.
It's a lot to review, and so I know.
It is, like, just if there's something that's not clear, people, that can be something that we could ask, but otherwise, the discussion piece, the deliberative piece would happen after the motion.
Yeah, I think that's.
So-
In a commission meeting, I understand the importance of the guidelines, right? So I'm not saying we should, but like, we ideally will never have like a 30-minute staff presentation in commission.
Right, because that's why we do it here. Right? And I think that's what we're doing is the work, which is what we always wanted to do, right? To make it more clear, just when we go in. So I'm for that.
This was under new business.
New business. Okay,
That's all.
Next meeting, May 11th.
next meeting, May 11th. I want to say that day, I'm having some dental stuff done that morning, and so I'm gonna be here. But I may be, how shall we say? A little,
Happy.
yeah,
Relying on others to.
I may just be a little interesting, right? Maybe you want to make plans to broadcast that one live. Because it might be a real show. No, I'm kidding.
I'm telling
So-
you, we're not anticipating any actions if, I don't want to proactively cancel. the meeting, but, like,
All right,
Yeah, I
well,
will-
it would be entertaining.
That will be one I'll miss, because I'll be out of building.
And that is the day we have, I believe,
We don't have any
the
action.
info sessions as well.
Also, I have something overlapping that day, and so this is my priority, but if there's no particular reason.
Except
Have the
to watch
meeting.
Commissioner Lefkoe.
Except to watch me chair a meeting.
You can FaceTime her for that, you know?
I would prefer not to leer.
We're gonna be on day 2 of the applications being open that day.
Yeah.
Assuming,
Let's just proactively give Commissioner Lefkowitz the opportunity to convalesce at home.
We can wait and see what happens on Wednesday.
we'll wait to see what
We need
happens
to,
on
yeah, we need
Wednesday.
to see. how-
We'll wait to see what happens on Wednesday. Darn, I was looking forward to being really, I was actually wondering, is this like, having to appoint someone else to do something because I'm unable to yet fill my duties?
I'm wearing these glasses and can't see. Can someone else do this?
Like, it could get really
Well,
fun.
dental, not vision, just kidding.
So anyway, I had already arranged for a ride. Paul's gonna drive me here, because I'll be like unconscious at 8 a.m. and then here. Anyway,
Let's call a point of order,
you
because
for
I'm not
your
sure where we are in the agenda.
Yeah.
yeah, all right.
Follow the room.
Move to
Okay,
adjourn.
I know.
This is me making.
I know, let's go. All right, so if there's nothing else, I would,
That's all new business and.
that's all new business, we're done, so I would, can I just take a motion or say, let's go?
Yeah, let's adjourn.
I move to adjourn,
Yeah.
okay, adjourn.